O'Reilly, I believe is a resident of Gibson now, but
Uniondale.
Uniondale.
No, it's the same thing.
As Dale mentioned, she's the author of several books, and they're excellent. And she does have some copies here if you desire to purchase after the meeting. And when she's opening to questions later in the meeting there, if you had any questions in regard to your books, I'm sure she'll field them for you. But without further ado, Tammy, thank you.
Thank you. I do want to thank you for inviting me. And I want to say right off that I am not an expert on the Holocaust or World War II German, but I have had a long interest in it. I've read a lot on it, and I have collected stuff for several years from it. What I'd like to kind of talk about tonight is the most famous camp, which of course is Auschwitz, and how it kind of came to be and the role it played in the Nazis' policy of mass extermination. Auschwitz was the site of the largest mass murder in world history. Some people estimate 1.1 million people died there, but it was built for an entirely different purpose than to gas the Jews. It was actually built to hold political prisoners, anybody the Nazis deemed an enemy of the state. When SS Captain Rudolf Höss came to Auschwitz in 1940, he found little there other than a handful of dilapidated buildings in great need of repair. Höss had worked in concentration camps in Germany since 1934, but Auschwitz would prove to be a challenge for him. He had little more than a month to create a camp to hold 10,000 prisoners, and he had very little help from the Nazi hierarchy or the concentration camp inspectors. In fact, he kind of had to scrounge around just to find the bare necessities. He ended up driving more than 60 miles just to get some soup kettles for the camp, and he didn't even know where to get barbed wire that was needed to hold his prisoners. He ended up pretty much pilfering that wherever he could find it. Despite those difficulties, though, in May of 1940, the first Polish prisoners arrived at Auschwitz. And the Nazi occupation of Poland, of course, was brutal, and it wasn't any different at Auschwitz. Of the 23,000 prisoners who arrived there in May, more than half would be dead within 20 months. Auschwitz simply wasn't a top priority to the Nazis until it was realized that where it was located was an area that had a lot of resources valuable to the war effort, mainly coal, water, and lime. And in fact, the IG Farben company had already selected a site about 4 miles from Auschwitz on which they were going to build a large rubber factory. And when Heinrich Himmler saw the potential, a deal was struck with IG Farben whereby they would build not just the rubber factory, but a complex of factories at this site, which was called Monowitz and would come to be known as Auschwitz III. And they would use slave labor from Auschwitz to build the factories and to work in them. So in early 1941, Himmler visited Auschwitz for the first time. Now, he had Commandant Harris, he ordered him to expand the camp to hold 30,000 prisoners, and he planned to use the money from IG Farben to fund the expansion. Now, in June of that same year, 1941, Hitler invaded Russia, and within a very short time, the Germans had taken 3 million Russian prisoners. In about 9 months, 2 million of them would be dead. Many of the others, the surviving ones, were sent to Auschwitz to begin construction on the IG Farben factories. Now, the Jews had been persecuted by the Nazis since they took power, and many thousands had already been killed in both Germany and Poland. But it was actually the Soviet Jews who were the first to really be targeted just to be killed. And SS officers would shoot male adult Jews on sight. It was not until Himmler and Hitler had a series of meetings in the summer of '41 that it was decided that all Soviet Jews should die. After that, the Jews were rounded up, men, women, and children. They were taken out to pre-dug mass graves, and there they were shot. And in this way, entire Soviet Jewish communities were literally annihilated. At the same time this was going on in Germany, 2 doctors visited Auschwitz from Action T4. Now, Action T4 was the name given to Hitler's euthanasia program, which has started in 1939, with the intentional killing of, at first, children. Soon it went on to include adults, but anyone the Nazis deemed unfit for life. And this included the mentally ill, the handicapped, the deformed, the chronically, terminally ill. Now, these killings were carried out by physicians in special institutions in Germany, and they used lethal injection to kill them. Excuse me, I'm getting a dry mouth already. The 2 doctors had come to Auschwitz to let Commandant Hirsch know about a new method of killing they had devised. What they did now was they sealed off a room. They brought their patients there, told them they were going to be showered, stripped them, put them in, and then killed them with bottled carbon monoxide gas. Himmler liked the idea. Himmler wanted this killing to be done at Auschwitz. So the first actual prisoners who died of gassing from Auschwitz did not die in the camp. They were actually taken to these special institutions, and they were gassed there. Now, at this point, the Nazis were simply experimenting on how to kill in massive numbers. Most executions happened by gunfire, but this was a slow way to kill in large numbers, and bullets were very expensive. They had experimented a little bit with explosives, whereby they dug bunkers, locked prisoners in, and then exploded them with basically dynamite. But this was pretty gruesome, and sometimes the explosives would cause small fires in the forests, and what they liked best was gas. But they knew they could not afford to send bottled carbon monoxide to all the camps in Poland and Germany, and they knew it wasn't feasible to think that they could take prisoners from these camps and take them elsewhere to exterminate them. So instead they decided they would use simply car exhaust to kill them. They would seal a room, and they would put the prisoners in it, and they would pump in carbon monoxide directly from the exhaust of a vehicle. And that was how they killed them for a while. It wasn't until SS officer Karl Fritsch was disinfecting lice-infested uniforms at Auschwitz one day that their most preferred method of killing was finally discovered. Now, Fritsch was disinfecting with prussic acid, which was made by the IG Farben Company and mass-produced under the trade name of Zyklon B. And Zyklon B came in crystal form, which, when it was released from its sealed container and met the air, formed a lethal toxic gas. Fritsch thought Zyklon B would be a good way to kill. So the first experiment with it happened at Auschwitz in Block 11, which was the prisoners' block, the most feared block in the camp. It was actually a prison within a prison. And the first experiment was done on Soviet prisoners. But it wasn't exactly successful. They didn't die at first. And the SS was forced to add more and more crystals until finally they did. Once, however, they had perfected how to kill with Zyklon B, Commandant Harris ordered a building in the main camp at Auschwitz to be converted into a makeshift gas chamber. This had a flat roof. They constructed a chute down the middle of the roof into the building. The prisoners would be locked in. An SS man would climb on the roof, put on a gas mask, drop the Zyklon B pellets down the chute. But there were problems. Number one, these killings should be done in secret, and they couldn't be with the chamber right in the middle of the camp. Plus, they were being done in daytime. It was almost impossible for the other prisoners not to see and hear what was going on. And some of the prisoners said the SS kept 2 motorcycles running outside the gas chamber when the killings were happening, and kept the engines revved as loud as they could go, but it didn't mask the sounds coming from inside. Prisoners later said they could still hear screaming, pounding, and scratching on the wall for 15 to 20 minutes before the gas would take effect. Still, the SS was happy with the results of Zyklon B. So in October of '41, literally only a month after their first experiment with it, they began making plans to build a new camp 2 miles from Auschwitz in a place called Birkenau, which would come to be known as Auschwitz II. This camp would be huge, capable of holding 100,000 prisoners, and the conditions there would be deplorable. I mean, no running water, no proper flooring, almost 1,000 prisoners to a barracks. But still, even with the new camp being built, the plan was not to have Jews there. This was being built for Soviet prisoners. And in November, 10,000 of them arrived to begin construction on it. By spring, only a few hundred would still be alive. Now, Auschwitz had little involvement with the anti-Jewish actions that were happening, but elsewhere things were getting very bad for the Jews. For instance, when the RAF bombed Hamburg, the SS regional leader, Karl Kaufmann, saw it as a perfect opportunity to get rid of the Jews from that city. He sent a letter to Hitler asking for permission to deport them, and Hitler agreed. He told Hitler that many Germans had lost their homes in the bombings, and if he deported the Jews, he could allocate their homes to the Germans who had lost theirs. Now, Hitler agreed, and soon a lot of other places followed suit. These Jews, too, though, did not go to Auschwitz. They were sent instead to the Jewish ghettos that had been set up in Poland, which were already bursting at the seams. Now, with this huge influx of new Jews coming in, the Nazis knew they needed to reduce the population. And this is what led to the very first actual extermination camp being built in a place called Chełmno in an isolated portion of Poland. Now, Chełmno had no gas chamber. Instead, what they were doing there is they would lead the prisoners into a room, down a ramp, and directly into the back of huge cargo vans. Once they were in there, the SS would close and seal the door, and then they would vent the exhaust from the van into the cargo area, and this is how they would kill them. It worked very well for them because they did not need to touch or see these bodies again. Once the prisoners were dead, the vans were simply driven into the woods to pre-dug mass graves, and they used other Jewish prisoners to empty the vans and bury the bodies. Now, on January 20th, 1942, Hitler and his top SS got together to discuss and coordinate the final question to the Jewish problem. And it was here at the Wannsee Conference that it was finally decided that every Jew under Nazi control should die. Heinrich Himmler and SS would be in control of this, and Adolf Eichmann, Ministry of Transportation, would coordinate the deportations. Now again, Auschwitz, well, at this time, of course, Auschwitz-Birkenau was the largest camp in the Nazi state, so plans for it soon changed. Soviet prisoners it was intended to house were sent elsewhere, mainly as forced labor, and it was prepared for the Jews to be sent there now. Commandant Hearst had 2 isolated cottages at Birkenau, made into makeshift gas chambers. These would come to be known as the Little Red House and the Little White House. And he could now do his gassings pretty much in secret. Now, Jews had been coming in to Auschwitz, but the first Jews to arrive from outside of Poland came from Slovakia. Now, Slovakia was an ally of the Germans, and they had a thriving Jewish community of about 90,000 people. When the Nazis asked for forced laborers, the Slovakians offered them 20,000 Jewish men and their families. The Nazis, however, didn't want the families. They wanted the men who could work. Slovakia didn't really want the families either because they didn't want to care for these people who no longer had husbands and fathers to support them. So what ended up happening is Slovakia actually paid the Nazis 500 Reichsmark for each Jew deported. And they handed over 60,000 Jews and paid them to take them. Now these Jews arrived at Auschwitz on August 29th, 1942, and those not selected to work went directly to the Little Red House. The people in charge of taking the prisoners, the Jews, to take them into the gas chamber were called Sonderkommandos. These were fellow Jewish prisoners who were kept, basically they had barracks at the crematoriums. They were kept completely isolated from the other camp prisoners because, of course, the SS didn't want to risk what was going on there getting out. This was another reason why the typical Sonderkommando worked approximately 4 months before he himself was sent to the gas chamber and killed. Now in July of '42, the first Jews from the West were sent to Auschwitz, and these Jews came from France. They were first sent to a transit camp where the Nazis said they didn't have permission to bring the children east. So the children were sent back to France, to a concentration camp outside of Paris, where they were held for a short time until Berlin finally sent permission that they could go east. So at that time they were put back on a train and taken to Auschwitz, where they were taken directly to the Little Red House. On that day, 4,100 children, ages 2 to 14, arrived at Auschwitz, and every one of them died. At the same time, Himmler ordered the resettlement of the Jews, or the liquidation, actually, of the Jews from the ghettos in Poland, some 2 million people. Of course, the ghetto Jews had been being killed at Chełmno since it had opened, but Chełmno could never handle all of these Jews. So it was then that more extermination camps began being built. Treblinka, Belzec, Sobibor. These camps were very small because they had only one purpose, to kill. And 99% of the Jews who arrived there were dead within 2 hours. Now the Nazis were really proficient at killing, but they were not so good at disposing of the bodies. The crematoriums worked day and night, but they simply couldn't keep up with the amount of people they were killing. Corpses were piling up. So the SS ordered the Sonderkommandos to dig crematorium pits, which had large iron grates on top of them. And through trial and error, they learned that if you stacked alternating layers of wood and bodies, they were disposed of quite well. They were also ordered to build collection units in these crematory pits, which would catch the dripping fat from the bodies, which they could then use for other fires. With the disposal issue solved, Commandant Hearst ordered 4 new gas chambers built at Auschwitz. These chambers would be huge, capable of holding up to 2,000 prisoners at a time. Now, it's hard to imagine what it must have been like for the prisoners in the camps. I mean, it was horrendous. Simon Wiesenthal, who survived the Holocaust and became probably the most famous Nazi hunter out there, he told a story once that I never forgot about, and it kind of showed me how tenuous life was in the camps. He was outside working with other prisoners, and 2 SS guards were arguing near him. The one was saying that you could kill 2 prisoners with 1 bullet. The other SS guard was insisting it couldn't be done. And suddenly, the guard who said it could grabbed the 2 prisoners next to Wiesenthal, had them stand back to back, placed his pistol in one of their mouths, and pulled the trigger. And as the 2 fell dead, the one SS guard who said it couldn't be done simply shrugged his shoulders and said, "I guess you were right," and they walked away. And I never forgot that story when I heard it. And, you know, there was nothing they could do. There was no rhyme or reason to the camp. There was nothing you could do to keep yourself safe or save your life. You could be the best prisoner, the hardest worker, obey every rule, and you could still be killed for no reason whatsoever. And it wasn't just the SS men who were brutal. It was the SS women as well. At Auschwitz, there were about 170 female SS guards who were in charge of the 30,000 female prisoners housed in the 62 barracks in the women's camp. One of these guards was Irma Gries, who was 20 years old in 1943, the daughter of a farmer, and there was nothing in her background that would hint at the monster that lived in this woman. She would keep her dogs with her and signal them to attack and ravage prisoners at will. She would whip the women. She would shoot them. She would beat and stomp them to death. It's even been said that she sent many to the gas chamber. She pretty much viewed that woman's camp as, you know, her own sadistic playground. Now, after the war, she was tried for war crimes and crimes against humanity. She was convicted and she was sentenced to death. Now, Irma Gries was hung 2 months after her 22nd birthday. And that just blows my mind, to be honest with you. But perhaps the most notorious SS officer at Auschwitz was by far Dr. Joseph Mengele, whose interests lay in genetics and whose contribution to the Third Reich was to see if he could figure out how to create the master race of blue-eyed, blonde-haired Aryans that Hitler so desperately wanted. He believed the secret to this lay in twins. He collected as many of them as he could get, housed them in special barracks for his own exclusive use, and Dr. Mengele was pure evil. I mean, most of these twins were children, and he would inject them with diseases such as malaria or typhus. He drew blood from them till they fainted with weakness. He injected foreign blood types in them just to see what would happen. He injected chemicals into their eyes in an attempt to change the color. And if one of his twins died, usually the other was killed with an injection to the heart immediately so he could perform simultaneous autopsies on them. And while these horrors continued in the camps, things weren't going quite so well for the Nazis elsewhere. There had been some problems in other camps, some uprisings, some successful escapes, but even more worrisome was the fact that some countries, feeling that the Nazis might just lose the war, had decided to stop cooperating with them and were refusing to deport their Jews. In March of 1944, the Germans entered Budapest. Now, Hungary was an ally of the Nazis, but a reluctant one because they didn't want to deport their 760,000 Jews. In May, the Nazis began deporting them anyways. Already, almost 600,000 Jews had died at Auschwitz, and in the next 2 months, from May of 1944 to July of 1944, approximately 300,000 more Hungarian Jews would die there as well. Nearly 75% of every trainload of Jews who came into, of Hungarian Jews who came into Auschwitz went directly to the gas chambers. But in July, when it became pretty much clear that the Nazis would lose, the Hungarian officials stopped the deportations. Now, with no more Hungarian Jews arriving, the order was given out to start killing those already in the camp at Auschwitz. And on August 2nd, 1944, the entire gypsy camp, some 21,000 people at Auschwitz, was liquidated. After that, it was the Sonder Commandos. The killings had gone from 10,000 a day in May to 1,000 or less now. The Sonder Commandos knew they would not be needed, and they created an uprising at Auschwitz. They lit fires, they attacked their SS guards. Most of them died for their effort, but the SS did keep a few around to continue getting rid of, disposing of the bodies. A decision they'd live to regret, because some of those Sonderkommandos survived and lived to tell what was happening. By January of '45, even the Nazis knew that the war was lost. The Red Army wasn't far from Auschwitz, and now the SS began a massive frenzy on trying to destroy evidence of what had been going on there. Records and files were taken away, burned, destroyed. The gas chambers and the crematorium were burned up, or blown up. And the remaining prisoners in the camp were gathered together, and those who could walk were taken on a death march. The others were left at the camp to fend for themselves, not knowing that an SS unit had already been ordered to come there and shoot them, so no witnesses would be alive. On January 27th, 1945, the Russians liberated Auschwitz and found about 2,000 prisoners left in the camp. And this was only because that SS unit never came to shoot them as they had been ordered to do. In those 2,000 prisoners were several hundred children, all that was left of Dr. Mengele's Jews. Now, after the war, most of those higher-up officials who were directly responsible for the killings there fled. Heinrich Himmler was eventually taken by the British and committed suicide. The commandant of Auschwitz, Hirsch, was found working as a farmhand. He was tried for war crimes, crimes against humanity, convicted, and hung. Adolf Eichmann fled to Argentina, where he lived for the next 15 years with his family as a free man until 1960, when Nazi hunters tracked him down, kidnapped him, brought him to Jerusalem, and had him tried, convicted, and hung. Dr. Mengele escaped to South America too, but he made good on his escape. He lived there for the rest of his life, at times using his own name, and he died of drowning in 1979 in Brazil. Wow. The only other thing I'd like to say is that I have, at times, taken some flack for collecting this stuff. I have people who tell me it's offensive. I have people who I feel would like to forget this ever happened, would like to bury it, should be no reminders of it. And I think that's so wrong. Because what happened in the Holocaust should never be forgotten. 11 to 14 million people died in the Holocaust. You know, that's why our military went in there and filmed the camps when they liberated them. Why they let the press in. Because they themselves said, the world can never forget what happened here. And it's sad to say, but it is being forgotten. Young people don't know what happened in World War II. Half people my age don't know what happened in World War II. And that's a shame, because it should never be forgotten. That 11 to 14 million people, and every one of them were just like you and me. They all had lives, they all had hopes and dreams, people that they loved, and all of it was just wiped out by Hitler and his Nazi regime. That should never be forgotten, because when people forget the past, they tend to repeat it. So I'd like to invite you to come up and see what I have. I'll answer any questions for you if I can. And thank you for having me. Now I'm going to wait for Mr. Chrissa to tell me what I had wrong.
Oh, you're great.
He knows a lot more about this stuff than me. That I know.
It's very informative.
Thank you. It shouldn't be forgotten. So, but come up and see what's there. And
Can
it's
you
all.
mention your books before you?
Oh, yeah.
Things?
I did write 2 true crime books. I'm kind of into the macabre. My mother hides back there because she's like, "What's wrong with you?" But one is from Vanling, which was about 9-year-old May Barrett, who was killed by 13-year-old Myron Simonchik. The other one's from over in Factoryville, Tunkhannock, and that was Charles Homeyer case. And they're both very fascinating local crimes that I'm sure, you'd be very interested to read. And I do have a few books if anybody's interested in them, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Was it the Arabs that don't believe, that deny there was ever a Holocaust? Wasn't it somebody, the Arab people?
I have heard that. I have also heard that in some European countries, they're teaching them it was a myth.
Yeah.
I've tried to find out more information on that, and I really haven't been able to.
Well,
So I'm not sure what to tell you there.
I know there's people that denied it. I've read about it.
I
They don't
think
believe it ever happened.
I think it's the Muslims, to be honest with you, who say it was an American story that was made up. I don't know how anybody can deny it. I mean, there's so much evidence out there from it,
Yeah.
but
A lot of soldiers were over there. There were eyewitnesses.
that's right.
There were eyewitnesses that time.
Mm-hmm. A lot of our soldiers.
Yeah.
It was a horrible time.
No, I don't think I'd want to been there at the time. Or I wouldn't be here now.
Well, you know what? I mean, you certainly would not have wanted to be a Jewish person at that time.
No.
I mean, what was done to them was just... I don't think you can even begin to imagine what it had to have been like. I just don't.
You can't.
You can't. You can't.
Did they keep a registry of their names that they killed?
The Jews?
Yeah,
No.
because like they, well, I don't know, if all were tattooed, but they had numbers on them.
They were all tattooed. In fact, they were tattooed, and they were also given the triangles to wear. The triangles would classify what kind of prisoner you were. You know, like red were Poles, green were criminals, purple were Jehovah's Witnesses, pink homosexuals. I mean, they went after everybody. They hated everybody. But as far as I know, no, there's no real record of, which is why they don't even really, that's what they say, 11 to 14 million died. They don't even really have an exact count, which is really sad.
That's just an estimate, right, honey?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
The Holocaust Museum in Washington has a list of a lot of the people who were actually murdered
Mhm.
and a list of the people who survived.
Have you been to the Holocaust
I haven't,
Museum?
but I've checked it on the internet.
Yes,
There's
there.
different sites on the internet that have the lists of people who actually survived the Holocaust
Yes, yes.
and the ones who were.
They don't have a complete and accurate list, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
There's a Jewish website too that has a lot of information.
Yes.
about it.
yes. There are pictures up here of basically what I talked about mostly. Auschwitz-Birkenau. That's a panoramic view. You can see how huge that camp was. I have not gone there. I would very much like to one day visit Auschwitz. I have relatives who have been there, and they said that the experience is just,
Probably overwhelmed.
yes, you know, that you can't really describe it. These last three pictures down here are from Block 11, where the first experiment with Zyklon B took place. There's crematoriums here, and then, you know, this is the gateway to Auschwitz-Birkenau, the main corridor in Auschwitz-Birkenau, and, you know, the work makes you free entranceway to Auschwitz itself. Work makes you free. But some of the stuff, of course, is not from the camps. Some of it is just, even like this is American, and I just brought this because I just think these K-rations are about the neatest thing, the little Lucky Strike cigarettes and,
That's so neat.
you know, other stuff, just some tinnies, patches. This case does have letters from Dachau, Auschwitz, prisoner artwork. This is from Buchenwald. This is basically like canteen money from the camps. This is an anti-Semite postcard. This is actually from World War I, but it's a German card. I mean, the Jews had been persecuted and for forever, you know. This is a syringe, which did come from Auschwitz. The box is marked Auschwitz. Eyeglasses, which I kind of find fascinating because the case on these is marked Dr. Benjamin Silverstein, Auschwitz, and it's got the Jewish star. And I can't figure out why a Jew would have a glass case marked like that. Unless maybe he worked for Dr. Mengele or something, and Dr. Mengele liked him. I don't know what that's about. This is, I was told, a body hook. I'm not sure.
You don't have an explanation for it though, huh?
No, I mean, it
Oh,
certainly
gee.
looks like it was used to
Do something.
drag
Not so
something.
good.
And then just, you know, some of the other stuff. This is an SS German mess kit.
There's no K-races in
What did
inside
they
those.
wear the hat for?
This is a Shako hat. This is actually just, this would have been like the German police.
Yeah, that's what you mean.
What's the one, the furry hat?
This is actually a Hitler Youth winter marching band hat. And I can find no information on this. I have never seen one before. I asked Mr. Chrissa, he said he hasn't seen one either, which,
Where'd you get it?
this one I got from this came from a vet in the Forest City area. We used to have a shop in Forest City, and a little antique shop. And they knew that I was into this stuff, and I would have people come in and ask me if I wanted to buy different stuff, and this was one of the things that came in. And it is RZM tagged, and I can't find any information out on it. I think it's a really unique piece, though. A lot of this stuff came from a man named Ed Gorey. This is just a little thing with stuff he had cut out, and they're just pictures from the Army Times, May 5th, 1945, and he wrote different things like, I have seen many like this, and this is the bodies, and, you know, I have seen this
Oh,
table where they would beat them.
That's the famous picture there, I've seen that one.
Yeah.
The
and
three
then-
men there, yeah.
Yeah, and then I have seen many cases like this when I was there. So, this is something, if you just wanted to browse through too, there's not too much in it, but feel free to come up and take a look, and thanks again for inviting me.
No, thank you for
Very
coming.
good.
I learned some